Our next speaker is Shane Prince from Labour for Refugees. Chris Bowen, in the September 10 Instrument of Designation, which allowed the government to send people to Nauru, made it very clear that Australia's international obligations weren't nearly as important as his own callous political calculus. He didn't use that term, of course. He called it Australian national interest. But there is one group within the Labor Party which is committed to a decent treatment for refugees. Shane represents it. Let's make him welcome.
Go, Shane.
I'm glad to be here today among friends. We stand here today for decency. We stand here against those who would attack the Refugee Convention. Unfortunately, we stand here against the leadership of the Australian Labor Party in the Australian Parliament. It is a disgrace that they have breached the party platform over and over and over again. And when it's pointed out to them that what they want to do is in breach of a platform, they go to conference and they convince people to vote in favour of deleting those pesky provisions of the Labor Party platform which try to preserve the inherent dignity of human life and the importance of the Refugee Convention which people fought and died for. It is a disgrace that they will not simply stand up and honour their legal commitments but act like a bunch of con men who are trying to get around the law at every turn. We stand here because we want international law upheld. We are the ones who are standing up for the establishment, oddly. We are the ones who are standing up for the state of law as it has existed ever since the United Nations decided that no more people would be turned away from civilised nations in their hour of need. That convention is not just an instrument of international law. It is the legacy. It is the legacy of the Second World War. It is the legacy of the last time that governments knew the difference between right and wrong. It's the legacy of the time when people stood up for decency. And it is being trammelled by this government in a cynical attempt to placate voters who it doesn't understand. It is not at all a product of people in Western Sydney to dislike refugees or to be mean-spirited or to be nasty or to want innocent men, women and children to suffer. I do not accept that that is a mainstream political view. It is not ordinary Australians who feel this way. Unfortunately, it is the leadership of that department who feel that way, and it is their agenda which has been trotted out time after time after time in the guise of populism. And what is most disappointing is that the leaders of the mainstream working class groups in Australia, the great Labor Party which I joined because my grandfather was a tram driver, the great Australian Labor Party that represented my father as a taxi driver, has been debauched by these middle-level, inept, poorly educated has-beens who've managed to get themselves into Parliament and who have no connection with real people. They have never worked a real job in their lives. They have always been preaching to people. They have never been speaking to people. They have never engaged in a conversation, and they do not realise that what Australians say and what they feel are sometimes two different things. And if they talk to Alan Jones on Talkback and say outrageous things about refugees who arrive, if one sits down and has a cup of tea with them and asks them how they would feel if a 5-year-old child was told, or their parents were told, that they would be stuck in Indonesia for 15 years because of arbitrary limits that these people created, of course they understand that you would get onto a boat. They would do it themselves. But this ridiculous bureaucratic merry-go-round has been made at the stroke of a pen by the people who sit above that building and who sit in Canberra, who have unilaterally decided that they are going to stop people from Indonesia being resettled in Australia in a rational, reasonable way. by taking only 54 people a year over the last 10 years, those people, those bureaucrats, have created the crisis. They have created the crisis that has driven their budget for the last 10 years in excess of any other government department in the Commonwealth. They have made themselves immune from review. And if you want to understand the true reasons for the debate and the state of the debate in Australia for refugees, you just have to follow the money. You just have to see who gets the greatest advantage out of this hysteria that has been whipped up by those who lead us. It is not the people who work in Blacktown. It is not the people who work in St Mary's. It is the contractors, it's the department, it's the bureaucrats who get much bigger budgets, and it certainly isn't the poor wretches who are sitting in camps in Indonesia. They have created a problem. They know they have created this problem. They have blood on their hands, and of course they won't admit that this is the real cause of the problem. Of course they will try to blame others. Of course they will try to blame the people smugglers and create yet another evil genie that everybody can hate. But this problem will not be solved until we realise who the real evil is. Who is it that is creating this problem? It is the people in that department who have unilaterally decided to turn the tap off on refugees from Indonesia, who have created the bottleneck, and they still refuse to solve it. They had an opportunity to fix this problem. All the submissions that went to the Prime Minister's expert panel said one thing, that the reason people get on boats is desperation. And the desperation is caused by the choice that we will only take 54 people a year from Indonesia. We have created this problem, and the consequences are obvious and predictable, but they will not face up to it. Instead, we get the deterrence solution. That is, we get to blame everyone else except the bureaucrats who have determined the number of people who will come from Indonesia. So whatever you do, don't look here. And we get the deterrence solution and we get told this will save lives. We get told we are real humanitarians, don't you understand? The whole reason we're doing this is because we want to stop people dying at sea. Well, I don't see that debate now coming out after the most recent boat sank on its way to Australia. Where are the wringing of hands now? Where are the tears on TV by reason of the most recent deaths? Are those lives somehow worth less than the lives of the people who conveniently perished before they wanted to get their policies through? Why treat one group differently to another? I'll tell you why. Because it's not consistent with their great theory. They have put the deterrent model in place. They have announced it to the world. They have said that the reason this policy will work is because we will make it clear that if you get on a boat from Indonesia, you will be sent to Nauru. Well, thanks for that. We know that now. You've said that, and yet still they get on the boats. And yet still they die. And they still die for the very reason that they were told before they embarked on this foolhardy policy that people would still get on the boats. This is something that I really regret being right about, but I was right about. And everybody who put a submission into that Prime Minister's panel was right about. The only people who didn't get it right are the people who are making the policy, the people who are ignoring those of us who deal with refugees day in, day out for decades, the people who ignore those who know the real reason why this is occurring, because it suits their interests. And so when that boat sinks, and when there's a great loss of life, as there has been, and when the boats keep turning up, they don't talk about that, because it just doesn't suit their interests. So when self-interest is the jockey, you know the horse is trying. And these people are only self-interested. They do not care about the problems faced by those poor wretches who have arrived in Indonesia seeking shelter from our enemies, from the Taliban, from the very people we have just spent 10 years fighting. They are our enemy's enemy. They should be our friends, and we should allow them to come here. So, friends, I say to you, these are dark times, and I know that it's disheartening. But we are on the right side of this debate. We are on the right side of history. It is only by implementing the proposals that we put forward that the loss of life will stop. I don't know how many more people it will take to die before they finally admit they were wrong, before they finally back down from their stupid pride, before they finally are secure enough within themselves to actually listen to people who know what they're talking about. I hope for that day, and I pray for that day, and history has shown that that day will one day come. And when it does, you will tell your children or your grandchildren that you were here on the right side of the debate, and that you stood up for what was decent and what was fair and what was honest. And you stood up for what real Australian people genuinely believe, and you stood up to the bad guys, because on this, we are the good guys.
Thanks a lot, Shane. Our next speaker